My heartbeat was syncing with his in a rhythm that was at once intoxicating and terrifying. Tate's warmth seeped into my skin, into my veins, as if his body had no boundary without mine. He was hooked, every cell in Tate's body trained to recognize mine as the only signal of calm, the only key to emotional release needed to sleep. And the worst and most exquisite part was that the craving never faded. Every night he needed more pressure, more proximity, more absorption. He no longer just lay on me, he melted into me. He inhaled my warmth, exhaled my rhythm, and his body shivered with a longing so visceral it made my own pulse stutter. It was a dependency that had nothing to do with me as a person, nothing to do with love in the conventional sense. It was a bodily addiction. A hunger written into the very wiring of his nervous system. And I let him press himself into me, let him mold his need into the hollow of my chest, because the way he needed me, because the way his body could not survive without mine, was terrifying, intoxicating, and unbearably real. It was a hunger without end, and every night I felt it deepen, knotting our bodies together, fusing our rhythms, making each heartbeat, each breath, each inch of warmth more necessary than the last. He was mine in ways words could never claim, not through desire or consent, but through the relentless, exquisite craving of his very flesh. Night after night the ritual repeated itself. I would lie down, arranging myself carefully so that he could stretch into me without discomfort, holding the space between us like a fragile promise. He would shift slowly, almost hesitantly at first, until his body finally found the rhythm it needed, his arms draped over me, head resting near my shoulder, legs curling against mine. And in that alignment, in the warmth and stillness of our shared space, the tension that clung to him all day, worries, fears, memories, would begin to dissolve. I watched him breathe, slow and steady, the rise and fall of his chest a quiet signal that his mind was finally turning off, that sleep was seeping in. There was a fragility to it, a dependency that could have felt oppressive in another context, but here it was simple, pure and tender. No words were necessary, the act itself was communication. My body was his safety, my presence was his peace. And there was love in it, platonic, patient and unwavering. It was the kind of love that doesn't demand anything in return, doesn't bend to desire or expectation, but simply exists in the service of someone else's well-being. I was there each night not because he asked in words, but because he needed me there. Not because I sought closeness, but because closeness was what he required to survive the dark hours of his own mind. Sleep interdependence, I would later understand, is both a gift and a burden. It is intimacy in its rawest form, a merging of trust and vulnerability that can sustain or strain the bond between two people. With Tate, it was sustaining. Night after night, body to body, breath to breath, we built a quiet fortress against the dark, a platonic sanctuary that neither of us could have imagined in our waking lives. And so I lay there hour after hour, holding the space he needed, knowing that my presence, simple, silent, steadfast, was enough. That in the smallest, most intimate way possible I was keeping him safe, and in that safety he could finally rest. Because of Tate's sleep interdependence, he would do anything to get me into bed. He needed my body under his so he could finally rest and sleep uninterrupted from his day's stress. It wasn't about affection or preference or even liking me, he couldn't rest if I wasn't there. Somehow, some inexplicable bond had formed between my body and his nervous system. My presence alone triggered the relaxation he desperately needed. My body became the key to turning off the constant churn of his mind, and nothing else mattered. I was so young, so foolish to believe that Tate actually cared about me or that he loved me after my 18th birthday. I see now that it wasn't love at all. It was a need, a dependency, a physical requirement disguised as intimacy. Tate would say anything, do anything to make sure I lay down beside him. He didn't have to offer me affection, reassurance, or even kindness. All that mattered was that I was there. My presence was the medicine, everything else was irrelevant. And worse, he didn't try to break the cycle. He didn't try to loosen the grip of this sleep interdependence. If anything, he acted like he was fanning the flames, subtly ensuring that the bond tightened, that I felt the pull more acutely. It was like he was stalking the very thing that made me vulnerable, knowing exactly how to make it worse, how to make me comply, how to make my body part of his survival mechanism while my heart clung to illusions of care and love that never existed. Tate would leave the girls' beds by 9 in the evening because he literally couldn't sleep there. No matter what, he couldn't rest. He had to go home to me, to his own bed where sleep was possible. The problem, I realized, wasn't the sleep interdependence itself. That, as frustrating as it could be, was manageable. The real issue was something far more complicated. Tate didn't just need me to fall asleep. He actually liked the person whose arms and body were wrapped around him. That was the part I hadn't expected, the hidden truth beneath the nights of quiet dependence. He hadn't entered our odd relationship wondering if he would like me, and yet somehow he did more than the sleep interdependence required. It was ironic, almost cruel in its subtlety. The very thing that should have been a purely physical, platonic necessity had become something deeper, something emotional. He needed me, but he also wanted me. And the combination of those two forces, need and affection intertwined, made our nights together infinitely more complicated than either of us could have imagined. Talia Tate's mother was the only person in his family who knew about his sleep interdependence. She understood what no one else could, the depth of her son's reliance, the quiet necessity that bound him to me each night. That was why Tate didn't want me to tell anyone not a word about what we did or didn't do. The secret wasn't about intimacy or shame, it was about control. Tate didn't want anyone to realize just how dependent he was on my presence. Tate had always understood the first kind of dependence, physical sleep interdependence. As long as my body was there, he could rest. My pulse, my heartbeat, the warmth of my skin pressed to his chest, these were his anchors, his drug, the only way his nervous system could truly relax. For years, that had been enough. His body recognized mine and yielded to it, folding into the rhythm of my breathing, letting the steady cadence of me quiet the constant hum of his thoughts. But years later, Tate discovered something far more consuming. He realized there was a second layer, a dependency that was far more intricate, far more fragile, emotional sleep interdependence. This one demanded more than proximity or touch, it demanded the focus of my emotions. My body alone was no longer sufficient. My warmth, my heartbeat, the physical contours he had once worshipped, they could soothe his nervous system only so far. Beyond that, what his body needed, what his mind craved, was me emotionally present, tender, attentive, and willing to be his sanctuary. He understood it suddenly, painfully, in the quiet hours of the night. Lying atop me, feeling the steady press of my chest beneath his, he noticed the subtle tension in his mind, the restless flicker of unease, the whispering of anxiety. My body was there, yes, but his heart and his mind whispered the truth. Without my emotional engagement, without the recognition that I was focused on him, trusting and tending him, sleep could not come fully. It was as though the nervous system and the heart had begun to speak in separate languages. The body alone could calm his muscles, but his mind, his emotions, demanded acknowledgement, tenderness, and care. Tate's worship of me deepened. He had always adored my body, yes, had lain against it, absorbed its rhythm, let it regulate him in ways that no pill or meditation ever could. But now he realized the truth that both thrilled and terrified him. My body was not enough. He needed my attentiveness, my tenderness, and my conscious affection. My emotional presence was no longer a quiet supplement. It was the anchor, the stabilizer, the sinew that tied him to rest. Without it, my body, no matter how perfectly pressed against his, could not summon the surrender his mind and heart demanded. He felt it in subtle ways. When I shifted, hesitated, or failed to meet his gaze or fold my arms around him in that exact way he needed, sleep became slippery. The muscles of his body still pressed against mine, still sought the comfort of warmth, but his mind remained alert, uneasy, restless. Tate's mind, for the first time, realized something remarkable. It was not the heat of my skin or the steady drum of my heartbeat that soothed him completely, it was the tenderness I directed toward him, the conscious, active devotion of my presence. And so he began to worship me, not in the way of lust or simple desire, not in the fevered way of craving physical addiction, but in the slow, reverent way one venerates something sacred. Every inhale of my breath, every gentle adjustment of my hands, every quiet acknowledgement that I was there for him, focused on him, these became his necessary ritual. His body still needed mine, yes, but his mind and heart demanded my tenderness above all. Sleep without it was impossible. Sleep with only the body and not the devotion felt hollow, incomplete, an echo of what it could have been. Tate realized, with a mix of awe and torment, that my emotional presence had become as essential as my physical form. My body could no longer suffice on its own. It had to be paired with my attentiveness, my softness, my deliberate care. It was no longer enough to merely lie beside me. He needed my heart and my focus entwined with my body, tenderly fixed on him, holding him steady even when the world outside refused to. Only then could he rest completely, letting both mind and body surrender to the deep, sacred rhythm that I alone could provide. Tate loved the body he needed to sleep next to each night, the warm, familiar presence that made his nervous system quiet, his muscles unwind, and his restless mind finally still. But that love, that reliance on a body had changed long ago. Ever since his 8th birthday, Tate realized that it was no longer just a body he adored. He had begun to love the boy, not just the blonde's body, the boy whose pulse he synchronized with, whose warmth he needed to cradle him into sleep. It wasn't just the physical closeness anymore. It was the boy himself, the skinny, blonde-haired nerd with blue sapphire eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the sky, the boy whose very being was overwhelmingly sweet, selfless, loyal, forgiving, trusting, loving, kind, warm, bubbly, giggly, playful, and utterly naive. That boy Noah was everything Tate had ever craved to exist near without knowing it. His kindness, his soft innocence, his willingness to see the good in others, the way he gave trust so freely, all of it ensnared Tate in a way nothing else could. The body had been the first anchor, but the boy inside it had become the obsession. Tate's love for Noah grew beyond mere admiration. It became an all-consuming fixation that matured into devotion and worship. Every glance, every soft laugh, every tiny gesture Noah made rooted itself in Tate's mind and heart. He obsessed over the way Noah moved, the way Noah thought, and the way Noah trusted the world even when the world didn't deserve it. It wasn't just attachment anymore, it was devotion. The boy beneath the blonde body had become sacred, the center of Tate's world, the axis around which his very being rotated. Noah's sweetness, his loyalty, his openness, and his quiet vulnerability drew Tate in until obsession was inevitable. Tate could not look away. He could not imagine a life where Noah did not exist, as both the body that brought calm to his nights and the soul that consumed his days. The body had been the beginning, the tangible first step, but it was the boy inside, Noah, the endlessly giving, endlessly trusting, endlessly lovable boy, who claimed Tate completely. The boy who Tate loved above all others, the boy whose presence was both a drug and a blessing, a necessity and a treasure, the boy who made Tate's obsession not only inevitable but sacred. If I had known how completely my body had taken over his nights, how it had become the fulcrum of his sleep, I could have asked for anything and he would have given it. Sleep wasn't just sleep for him, it was survival. Tate loved those 8 hours of rest more than he loved his wealth, more than his car, more than his own body. And I, without ever intending to, had become the gatekeeper of that sacred, non-negotiable necessity. It was both power and vulnerability in its rawest form. My body held sway over his peace, his quiet, his sanity in ways that no one else even suspected. And yet he guarded the secret fiercely, as if exposure would undo the very thing he needed most. In that lie, in that silence, I understood the strange, quiet gravity of what had tethered us together, how essential and how dangerous a seemingly simple presence could become. Tate had become close with me because he was afraid of the dark. He thought it would be comforting to have someone around to talk to, someone to fill the empty hours of the night. What he didn't anticipate was that my presence would completely remove any control he had over his own life. Once I became part of his existence, I had, in a way, taken over. He became so dependent on me, on my body lying there at night, that he could not function without me. After I left the house following my 18th birthday, Tate could not cope. His arrested development meant he clung to me and became intensely attached. In his case, that childlike attachment was total. Tate's attachment was like a 5-year-old boy who loved his favorite toy. When that toy left, Tate could not sleep, eat, or even function without me nearby. He was, in a way, like a childlike platonic Pepe Le Pew from Looney Tunes, endlessly chasing me while I was the cat he circled. Yet there was no malice in it. He wasn't trying to destroy, manipulate, control, or invalidate boundaries. He simply wanted to remain close, lying next to me, and he had no words to express it. When I couldn't be there, he would emotionally snap. His dependence on me was so completely enmeshed that he didn't know where he ended and I began. Tate's need could be overwhelming. He would break door locks, pull me into bed, and order me down the hall, all because he needed me there. His mother Talia said his emotional arrested development was around the maturity of a jealous 5-year-old, and his tantrums were the result if I didn't comply with his demands. He was sweet in a chaotic, clumsy way like Pepe Le Pew. He didn't have the emotional maturity to say, "I need you so much. I'm dependent on you." All he knew was that without me, he couldn't rest, and that need drove everything he did. Tate cried like a toddler when I ignored him. In every other way, he was an adult, his mind, his body, his life, but his emotions remained painfully, impossibly childlike. I understand it now, the truth of those nights. I wasn't lying next to someone who only loved me. I was lying next to someone who needed me, and the distinction, though invisible then, would shape everything I thought I knew about him, about us, and about the boundaries I had so foolishly surrendered. When Tate forced me to sleep next to him, or when he picked a lock just to climb into bed, he didn't see his actions as coercion, he saw a game. He believed I was mad at him, or worse, playing hard to get. In his mind, I wanted him just as much as he wanted me. He had never been told no by anyone, not really, and words like no, stop, or boundaries were foreign, abstract, and meaningless. They didn't exist in the universe he lived in daily. The lengths Tate went to enter the room I slept in were enormous. He would break locks, slip through narrow gaps, or find other ways around obstacles I didn't think were possible. Every barrier I put up became, in his mind, a challenge to overcome rather than a boundary to respect. His arrested development made it impossible for him to separate boundaries from abandonment. A locked door, a struggling body, even my refusal, it was just something he needed to overcome. Resistance, hesitation, discomfort, they were obstacles, not signals. My refusal wasn't a refusal at all, but a sign I wanted him to chase me. In his world, it was simply another puzzle, another chance to assert the dependency he could not articulate in words. Every act, forcing the sleeping arrangements, breaking locks, demanding my presence, was both desperate and blind. He wasn't malicious. He wasn't cruel. He simply lacked the emotional language to express the depth of his need. Love, desire, dependency, they were tangled together in a single, overwhelming knot he didn't know how to untangle. Every night became a negotiation he couldn't name, a need he couldn't speak aloud, and a boundary he didn't even recognize. Tate saw me as his emotional security blanket, the one person who could soothe the fears he couldn't face alone. And yet, I dared to hide from him at night. He had given me an affluent life full of perks and privileges, carefully constructed so that nothing in the world could make me turn away, and still. He could not understand why one moment I was wrapped around him, enmeshed in his life, and the next, after my 18th birthday, I retreated to the spare room. To Tate, this was an affront he couldn't ignore. His arrested development interpreted the situation with absolute clarity. His blanket had been taken from him and something had gone wrong with Noah. He needed to reclaim it immediately. In his mind, the imbalance had to be rectified. The rules of the world as he understood them demanded that what was his, what had always been his, be restored. It wasn't malice, it wasn't cruelty. It was needed distilled into action, the blind, unrefined motion of a mind that could not separate love from dependency, affection from possession, sleep from survival. He didn't know how to say, "I need you, I am lost without you." All he knew was that the security his life had once given him, my presence, my body, my attention, was gone and he had to get it back. Tate figured that something or someone had stolen away his favorite bed warmer and he wasn't going to stand for it. If he had to throw a tantrum, stomp his foot, or break through a door to reclaim what had been taken from him without his consent, he would. There was no negotiation in his mind, no discussion, no compromise. What Tate couldn't understand was that my consent mattered at all. In his juvenile logic, he could not imagine a world in which a poor trailer boy would choose to be anywhere else. In a rich, affluent, welcoming home, he assumed, why would I want to go anywhere but to his warm bed every night? For over a decade, that bed had been my place beside him, my body lying there as a constant presence in his nights. And suddenly, after my 18th birthday, I ran away, retreating to the spare room. In Tate's eyes, someone had taken me from him. There was no malice in his conviction, no manipulation or cruelty, it was simply a truth in his mind. I was his favorite toy truck, his constant, and now I had been removed. Boundaries, autonomy, personal choice, these were foreign concepts. In Tate's understanding, we were not two people, we were one body, one entity, one inseparable unit. We were Noah and Tate, we ate at the same table, we slept in the same bed, we held hands as naturally as breathing. My presence was never separate from his, it was part of him, as essential as air, as necessary as sleep itself. When he couldn't sleep, he raged, not at the circumstances of life, not at accidents of timing, but at the person who had taken me away. Deep down, he genuinely believed that I would never leave him or his bed for any reason. And yet I had left, something must have lured me away. In his mind, it was a violation of the natural order, an imbalance that demanded correction. As the young man of the house, as the one in charge of his world, it was his job to restore what had been stolen, to reclaim what was rightfully his. I tried to explain boundaries, consent, and rules to Tate, but it was like speaking a foreign language. He looked at me as if I were speaking Japanese. His arrested development simply couldn't process anything beyond two boys playing together, growing up side by side and sharing their youth. To him, I wasn't asserting myself or asking for autonomy, I was being difficult, bossy, and cleverly strategic. He didn't understand that consent is the foundation of a healthy relationship. Tate had been used to making the rules in every part of his life. When you're rich and attractive, he thought, you can make any rules you want. He interpreted my attempts to enforce boundaries as a kind of maneuvering, a calculated move to gain influence, to demand money, or to extract some advantage. In his world, that was how relationships worked. Give a gift, offer something, and loyalty or compliance would follow. That's how he had gotten grades, attention, and the girls he desired. He didn't realize that healthy relationships aren't built on bribes or temptations. He genuinely thought that if he gave me money, bought me something, or offered a privilege, it would make me happy and I'd want to stay. He wasn't doing it to control me. He wasn't malicious, abusive, or manipulative. Tate was at heart like a 5-year-old child who wanted his toy truck returned. If someone took it, he would stomp, kick dirt, and retrieve it. I wasn't his toy truck, of course, and I certainly wasn't a possession. But in his mind, I was part of what belonged to him. He couldn't grasp that I had autonomy, that I might say no, that I could want something different. He thought he could convince me to return to the place where I belonged with him, in his bed, in his life, because that's what he knew. He couldn't separate desire from possession, need from ownership, or dependence from consent. In his world, love, attachment, and necessity were tangled together. He wasn't controlling or obsessive in a conventional sense, he just wanted what was his, what had been his constant for so long. He wanted his blanket, his toy truck, returned to him, and he had no language to understand that sometimes the toy or the person doesn't want to come back. When Tate pushed me to the floor, pinned me on the carpet, or dragged me down the hall and threw me onto his mattress, it wasn't cruelty, it was a tantrum, pure and unfiltered. He couldn't understand why his favorite toy truck was struggling, why the truck he had loved for over a decade suddenly wanted to play alone, to resist him. The mansion we lived in was vast, grand, overflowing with treasures and spaces, yet Tate refused to allow his toy truck to wander to mingle with other trucks to explore. In his mind, it was unimaginable that he could ever want freedom outside of his care. Tate believed that someone had taken his truck from him, hidden it away, or worse, tried to push Tate out of the picture entirely. He had invested too much emotional labor, too much time, too much of himself into the relationship with his toy to let it be taken or to allow it to rebel. Every scrape, every tantrum, every act of insistence from Tate was less about control and more about love, a frantic, desperate, childlike love. He genuinely cared for his truck. He cleaned it, dressed it, fed it, and tended to it. He offered it warmth, comfort, a place in his bed where it could feel safe, loved, and part of something larger than itself. For Tate, it was inconceivable that the toy might one day desire independence, that it could exist in the same house yet insist on making its own choices. He still wanted to play with it, to keep it close, to know it would always be within arm's reach. If it wandered too far or began developing ideas of its own, he felt compelled to correct it, gently nudging it back into his orbit, not out of malice or cruelty but because he couldn't bear the thought of losing the one constant that had anchored his world for so long. The toy had developed a streak of rebellion. It had begun asserting its own will, deciding where it wanted to go, who it wanted to spend time with, and how the relationship would unfold. But Tate had chosen it, welcomed it into his life, cared for it, protected it, and built his daily existence around it. In his mind, it simply wasn't supposed to refuse him. Tate wanted his toy truck beside him every night, sleeping in the room next to his, always close enough to reach. He wanted predictability, routine, and the quiet comfort of knowing exactly where it was. He didn't want it making waves, introducing chaos, or developing a life that existed beyond the world they had always shared. From Tate's perspective, the truck could have friends and interact with other children, but it was never supposed to prioritize them over him. Any relationship Noah formed outside the Blue House was expected to remain secondary, never interfering with Tate's routines, expectations, or the experiences he believed belonged exclusively to the two of them. If an outside influence threatened to reshape Noah's priorities, alter the rhythm of their lives, or pull Noah emotionally or physically away from him, Tate perceived it as a threat to the stability he depended upon. Anything that jeopardized his peace, disrupted his sleep, or diminished the place he believed he held in Noah's life became something he instinctively sought to remove, distance, or discourage. To Tate, preserving that familiar world wasn't about winning a competition. It was about protecting the only version of life that had ever made him feel secure. Even with all its defiance, Tate couldn't see Noah's rebellion and retreat as betrayal. He saw it as the behavior a confused or lost child would have during a small crisis. He would retrieve it, restore it, bring it back into the warmth of his care because deep down he truly believed it wanted to be with him. It was just having a moment of uncertainty. Tate's nursery, the bedroom where he kept his toys, was nearly empty. A few musical instruments lined the walls, mostly on display and autographed by famous people, gifts from Joey's favorite uncle. They were treasures, yes, but not playthings. The toy truck was his only companion, the only thing he could hold, play with, and bond with while living in a claustrophobic, lonely environment. When it tried to assert its independence, Tate was like a toddler who had lost his favorite binky or beloved blanket. He was completely adrift, without a source of comfort or distraction. The truck was more than a toy, it was the anchor of his afternoons, the companion that filled his loneliness with warmth, loyalty, and presence. At first, Tate had been introverted and secluded. He preferred being alone before their introduction in preschool, yet when he saw how sweet, loyal, and passive his toy truck was, he invited it into his life, welcomed it into his home, and introduced it to his mother, his father, and the rich world. The truck had been so happy to be there, so eager to please, so grateful for warmth and safety that it had thrown itself into his bed and stayed. What had started as a simple comfort, something to hold when he was afraid or anxious, grew into love. Childlike, pure, and absolute love. Tate began to see the truck not as a mere object but as a full, three-dimensional being with desires, feelings, and needs, but all of those desires pointed toward him until Noah fled the Blue House a month ago. And then the truck turned 18. It began to want independence, to explore life without him. It wanted to go to theaters alone, take walks, and meet other little girl trucks. To Tate, this was inconceivable. He knew what would happen if his favorite toy discovered new attachments, if it began forming other connections. Once the truck started dadding, once it noticed girls and other companions, it would drift away forever. Girls could provide intimacy, family, experiences, and things he could never give. Sex, for Tate, had always been a release, never a joy, an activity he did when Noah was absent or unavailable. It passed the time, but their moments spent at play or comfort with his toy were what brought him true happiness. Something or someone had turned his truck's heart away, and Tate didn't yet know what or who it was, but he would do anything to bring it back. He would offer anything, move heaven and earth, enter its room, retrieve it, and guide it gently but firmly back to him. This wasn't a passing infatuation, it was childlike elemental love. He had chosen the toy, nurtured it, given it safety and affection, and now that it dared to assert independence, he could not stand by. If the truck could be persuaded, coaxed, welcomed back, he would do everything in his power to restore the warmth, the loyalty, the companionship that had defined his life. Tate wasn't controlling, possessive, or malicious in the conventional sense. He was a child at heart, desperate to protect what he loved most, unwilling to accept that the thing he cherished might have its own will. In his mind, he hadn't made a mistake. He hadn't misstepped. He had given care, love, attention, and warmth, and all he wanted in return was the joy of being near the thing that had made him feel safe, whole, and alive. The rest of the world could crumble. He could fail in countless ways. But if he had his toy truck by his side, he could endure anything. Tate's love was relentless. It was fierce, unwavering, and innocent. He didn't know how else to protect the thing he cherished. Every act, every gesture, every measure taken to restore their closeness was a plea, a prayer, and a promise. You are mine, and I will not let go, not ever. Even now, as the truck tested boundaries, explored independence, and grew into its own life, Tate remained there. Watching, waiting, loving, his heart full, his hands reaching, ready to gather it back into his care. For Tate, there was no compromise, there could be no separation. The toy truck was not just a companion, it was a part of him, and he would spend every day, every hour, every breath ensuring that part remained near. And yet the truck, the independent, defiant truck, would not always comply. I wanted space. I needed autonomy. I was not his, not fully, and my life was no longer entirely entwined with his. Tate could not process this. He could not imagine a world in which the toy truck wanted to walk alone, talk to others, and experience life beyond his nursery. And so he reacted in the only way he knew how, with intensity, with presence, with relentless devotion. Tate was terrified. His own toy truck, his favorite, his only toy, had dared to say no. The little truck had decided it wanted to sleep alone. It went to great lengths to keep Tate out. Doors were closed, beds were guarded, and subtle resistance turned into bold defiance. And when Tate somehow managed to open a door and lie on top of the truck, trying to show how much he loved it, the truck became belligerent. It accused him of being awful, cruel, even unkind, though every gesture Tate made was born of pure, desperate love. Sometimes the truck would push him off. Each time Tate's heart seized, terrified that the truck was already scanning for a window, a door, and escape. He couldn't understand why his truck wanted distance. Outside in the larger world, there was nothing that could provide better care, better warmth, better attention than he could. Tate had wealth, influence, endless privileges he could lavish upon his little truck, and he would have done anything to keep it safe, happy, and near him. Tate understood compromise. He could offer some freedom, let the truck have friends, even let it wander a little once college came, also it wouldn't leave entirely. But that day, immediately after the truck's 18th birthday, something had changed. Overnight, the truck had grown bold, fearless, and audacious. He had never said no before, never resisted, never refused. And now it acted as though Tate's presence was unbearable, as if the love and care he had poured into it meant nothing, as though it wanted to belong to someone else, to be someone else's toy. Tate couldn't allow it. The truck was his, not anyone else's. If the truck thought Tate would permit it to wander, to choose another, to become someone else's, it was gravely mistaken. He held it tightly, hugged it close, and lay atop it to keep it from leaving. Even if he had to discipline it gently because it didn't yet understand the depth of his love, he would. Tate's actions were not about punishment, they were about desperate preservation. The truck didn't realize that Tate's presence, his constant care, and his unwavering attention existed only to keep the truck happy, to keep the bond alive. And yet, for reasons he couldn't understand, he had failed. The truck was asserting independence. Tate was terrified. If the truck could choose another person or discover his options, then maybe Noah would exercise those options, leaving Tate alone and coldly abandoned. Every morning, the truck would leave the bed early, slipping away before Tate could even open his eyes. Was it a statement, a rebellion, or a declaration of independence? Was it simply that the truck preferred to be alone, or was it seeking someone else? Tate didn't know, and the uncertainty consumed him. He became jealous, not in the way a romantic partner might, not in the measured, adult way, but the raw, visceral jealousy of a child when someone touches the one thing they treasure. Any glance, any gesture, any attention given to his toy by another was unbearable. Jealousy coiled in him tight and sharp because he couldn't bear to see what he loved most drift beyond his reach, even for a moment. The little truck had always been his anchor, his comfort, his constant. And now, for the first time, it seemed to be slipping through his fingers, testing the boundaries of a world Tate had built entirely for it. Tate didn't understand compromise fully. He didn't understand independence. He only knew love, childlike, consuming, absolute love, and the terror that came with the possibility of losing the only thing he had ever truly cherished. Every touch, every embrace, every act of insistence, even when rebuffed, was a frantic plea: stay, be mine, don't leave, I need you, I cannot survive without you. Unbeknownst to his little toy truck, it was not just his favorite companion, it was breathtakingly, astonishingly remarkable. Alert, radiant, alive with charm and spirit, the toy truck drew attention everywhere it went. Tate had known this since the truck was 8. Children and teenagers alike had noticed it. Boys wanting friendship, girls wanting its attention, admiration, affection, and sometimes more than affection. Everything about it seemed magnetic. And in the depths of his arrested development, Tate understood with the clarity of instinct that any other connection for the truck could be a threat. Ever since those early days, Tate had been vigilant. Every day was a careful balancing act of love, devotion, and protection. He had distracted potential rivals, bribed competitors, and when necessary slept with obstacles. He had shielded the toy truck from the world, aware that its allure could pull it away, that one enticing offer could undo years of shared life and unspoken understanding. He had spent thousands of dollars, given gifts, lavished attention, and defended the space that the truck inhabited, not out of greed, not out of possessiveness in the way others might understand, but out of the purest, most desperate childlike love. All the girls Tate had ever been with, over 700 across the city, had been part of this silent defense. They sought the truck, they sought its attention, they wanted its time, its energy, its essence. Tate had intervened, always acting first, always ensuring that the toy truck remained unassailable, untouched, safe. He had never acted with malice, he had acted with a devotion so childlike it was almost naive. For Tate, the truck was not just a companion. It was an extension of himself, a being he had nurtured, cherished, and enveloped with warmth for over a decade. He was terrified. Every glance, every movement away from him felt like a betrayal. The truck seemed to emit a scent, subtle yet unmistakable, a fragrance of love and devotion aimed somewhere else. Tate's heart ached at this, jealousy twisting and curling like a child discovering someone is touching its cherished blanket. He didn't understand why the truck could give affection to anyone else when it had always belonged to him, when every heartbeat, every sigh, every small smile had been offered to Tate alone. He remembered all the ways he had protected it, every distraction he had created, every obstacle he had removed, every bribe or gift he had offered to ensure its comfort, its joy, its loyalty. He had created a world around it, a cocoon of warmth and safety, not to trap it but to care for it. The toy truck had been his everything, and now it wanted something beyond him. Tate could not bear it. He thought of the other people, the boys and girls who might approach the truck, who might entice it with laughter, gifts, attention, or promises. He imagined them reaching for it and his chest constricted. His arms itched to protect, to gather, to hold. In his mind the truck was his, not in a possessive, cruel way but in the childlike certainty that comes from years of love and care. The truck was his companion, his anchor, his little heart in human form, and he would not let it slip away. Tate's love was the kind of love that couldn't be reasoned with. It was innocent, total, all-consuming. He had rocked it when it cried, wrapped it in warmth when it shivered, and stayed awake beside it when nightmares came. He had tended to it, nurtured it, enveloped it in comfort and affection, and the depth of that devotion was extraordinary. And yet now that the truck's gaze wandered, now that it sought connection elsewhere, Tate's childlike heart fractured. Tate didn't want to hurt it. He only wanted to be near it, to be part of its joy, to be the first hand it reached for in happiness and despair. He imagined holding it, comforting it, reminding him that it was loved beyond measure, loved in the purest, sweetest, most tender way a person could love another. Tate wanted to be its warmth when the nights grew cold, its shield when the world threatened, its companion in every moment. He would offer it anything, give it anything, and move heaven and earth if it meant keeping it nearby. Even now, with the truck testing boundaries, asserting independence, and daring to love someone else, Tate's heart remained fixed. He would fight for it gently, lovingly, fiercely. He would do anything to keep it safe, happy, and near him, because for Tate the truck was not just a companion, it was a piece of his heart, a fragment of his soul, a being he had cherished longer and more deeply than anything else in the world. And even in his jealousy, even in his fear, there was only love, sweet, childlike, unyielding love, a devotion that could not be measured, tamed, or diminished. Tate didn't see his truck as an inanimate object. To him it was more than plastic, more than flesh or habit. It was a living metaphor for the pure, unguarded love between a child and their most cherished, warm, small toy. When Tate hugged his truck, he didn't see a toy. He saw a companion, a being with feelings, a source of joy that had been his constant for almost 14 years. Tate didn't keep competition away out of greed or cruelty. He didn't seek to isolate or control for the sake of power. He removed obstacles because the thought of losing his truck was too raw, too painful to bear. When Tate realized that Noah, the little truck, was in love with someone else, he felt an almost unbearable ache. That love might take his truck away. He dared to hope it was unrequited, even as he knew that if it were, it would still leave an emotional scar on Noah, cause his truck pain. He hated the idea of his little truck's heart turning elsewhere. To Tate, even the thought of Noah loving another truck felt like betrayal. For 14 years, Tate had poured every ounce of care, devotion, and protection into his truck. He had nurtured it, wrapped it in warmth, laughed with it, slept beside it, and witnessed its bliss. Noah's happiness had always been intertwined with his own. He had watched the little truck dream, smile, hum, and sigh with delight, immersed in the ecstasy of being loved and cherished. Every gesture of affection, every quiet touch in the night had been a thread weaving them together. Removing competition had always felt less like control and more like maintenance, ensuring the truck stayed ecstatic, safe, and unburdened. Tate had sensed it nearly 3 years earlier. Long before Noah ever said a word, Tate had felt something changing. It wasn't something he could see or prove, only something he carried like a weight in his chest. Noah's heart no longer reached for him the way it once had. The quiet affection, the instinctive closeness, the effortless emotional bond they had always shared seemed to be fading little by little, until Tate could almost feel it slipping through his fingers. His instincts told him there was someone else. Somehow, somewhere, another person had slowly and methodically claimed the parts of Noah's heart that had once belonged to him. For nearly 3 years, Tate waited for the mystery girl to appear. He searched for clues that never came. She never walked through the front door, never called the house, never became a name he could attach to the ache in his stomach. Sometimes he wondered if Noah's feelings had been unrequited, if the girl had never known he existed. Other times, he imagined she might have been someone Noah admired from afar, a stranger, a celebrity, someone entirely out of reach. Every possibility seemed plausible because he had no answers. Then Maya entered Noah's life, and for a brief moment Tate wondered if she had been the one all along. But the timeline didn't fit. Maya had only moved to town a couple of months earlier, while Tate had sensed Noah drifting away years before she arrived. That realization only deepened the mystery. Maybe Maya was someone new. Maybe there had been another girl before her. Maybe Noah had loved more than one person. Tate wanted to ask. Countless times the question rose to his lips before fear forced it back down. As painful as uncertainty was, it still allowed him to imagine endless possibilities, some less devastating than others. The truth, however, would end every comforting illusion. Once Noah spoke the answer aloud, there would be no more pretending, no more inventing realities he could survive. Tate feared that knowing exactly who had taken Noah's heart would hurt far more than never knowing at all. Tate had often wondered about the way Noah loved. He watched the affection Noah showed every member of the Blue family: Terrence, Talia, Julia, Lydia, Tim, and Joey. Noah genuinely cared for all of them, but Tate couldn't help noticing that one relationship stood apart from the rest. From as far back as Tate could remember, there had been a unique bond between Joey and Noah. It had begun when Noah was around 6 years old and had only deepened over the years. Joey had naturally slipped into the role of a surrogate uncle and mentor, and Noah admired him with a warmth and trust that Tate found impossible to ignore. At times, Tate became quietly jealous of the closeness they shared. He resented the way Noah sought Joey's attention, valued his opinion, and seemed genuinely happy in his company. Whenever Noah prioritized Joey, even in small ways, Tate felt an irrational mixture of jealousy and anger simmer beneath the surface. Those feelings became one of the reasons Tate gradually stopped speaking to Joey around his 15th birthday. By the time Tate turned 16, the distance between uncle and nephew had become even more entrenched. When Joey missed Tate's 16th birthday because a snowstorm in Denver prevented him from traveling, Tate interpreted his absence as yet another disappointment and withdrew from Joey almost completely. Tate had little tolerance for anyone who competed for Noah's affection or occupied too much of Noah's emotional world. The lone exception was Talia. Noah's relationship with Tate's mother never stirred the same jealousy within him, perhaps because, in Tate's mind, a mother's love belonged in an entirely different place than anyone else's. Tate's jealousy over Joey and Noah's surrogate uncle-nephew relationship was intense, lingering, and impossible for him to ignore. It had simmered for years, but it became especially consuming after Tate discovered that Joey and Noah regularly wrote letters to one another while Joey was away at college and later traveling throughout Europe. The correspondence represented something Tate could never be part of: private conversations, shared memories, inside jokes, and emotional intimacy that existed entirely outside of him. Every letter was another reminder that someone else occupied an important place in Noah's heart. One afternoon, unable to contain his resentment, Tate found the stack of letters and began reading through them. As he turned the pages, his emotions boiled over. In a sudden burst of frustration, he ripped several of the letters apart. Noah walked in just in time to see the torn pages scattered across the room. Furious, Noah shouted at Tate for touching things that didn't belong to him and demanded to know what gave him the right. Already overwhelmed by jealousy and shame, Tate reacted instinctively. He shoved Noah backward onto the bed before storming out of the room, unable to face either Noah's anger or the guilt that followed. The confrontation wasn't really about the letters themselves. To Tate, they symbolized a relationship he couldn't control and a place in Noah's emotional world that he feared he could never replace. One of the reasons Tate insisted on accompanying Noah on long drives in Joey's car or tagging along whenever Tim invited Tate to auto shows was that he wanted to monitor how close Noah was becoming to the members of his family. Somewhere in Tate's mind, he had convinced himself that they were slowly trying to take Noah away from him. The fear was irrational, but to Tate it felt entirely real. Noah, however, found the idea almost unbelievable. The notion that the Blue family was secretly competing for his affection was so absurd that it occasionally made him laugh when he realized just how deeply jealous Tate could become. Looking back, Noah suspected Tate's jealousy had begun much earlier than either of them had admitted. He had even wondered whether, when they were 7 years old, Tate had grabbed the steering wheel while Joey was driving his pickup truck because he couldn't stand seeing Joey and Noah enjoying each other's company. Whether that had truly been Tate's motivation or not, it fit the pattern Noah had come to recognize over the years. Joey always seemed able to find time to write letters to Noah or call just to see how he was doing. Yet Tate couldn't help noticing that the same effort was rarely directed toward him. Joey seldom wrote him postcards with the same consistency or called simply to talk. To Tate, every letter Noah received and every phone call Joey made reinforced the painful belief that Noah occupied a place in Joey's life that Tate himself never had. The worst of it had happened on Noah's 16th birthday. Joey had given him a pair of underwater snorkel goggles so he could put his face beneath the surface of the bathtub and breathe while submerged. Before Noah even had a chance to say thank you, Tate had already pushed back from the table, walked straight over to Joey and shoved him out of his chair. It wasn't the first time he had reacted like that when Joey brought gifts. Over the years, Tate had developed a pattern of intercepting them, confiscating whatever Joey gave Noah until the items eventually disappeared altogether. By Tate's 17th birthday, the tension had escalated further. He told Joey directly to stay away from Noah and stop calling him altogether. Joey, instead of matching Tate's anger, would often laugh it off, brushing a hand through Tate's hair in an affectionate, almost dismissive gesture. He would remind Tate that no matter how close he was to Noah, Tate was still his favorite nephew, and he loved Tate the same way he'd always done since Tate's birth. Sometimes Joey would even pull Tate into a brief embrace which only made things worse. Tate would push him away, jaw tight, and leave the room, insisting that Joey was trying to take Noah from him, even as Joey stood there, calm and unwavering, refusing to see himself as a rival at all. Rules of the house had started to feel shaped around an invisible tension I couldn't fully access. He told Joey to stop calling me, to stay away completely. Joey never really fought back. He would just smile like he was watching something he didn't take personally, and sometimes he'd reach out and ruffle Tate's hair as if Tate were still a child throwing a tantrum he would eventually grow out of. Then he'd say, calm as ever, that Tate was still his nephew, still family, still loved. That only made it worse. Noah remembered watching Tate push Joey away again and again, leaving the room like he'd been betrayed, like Joey had stolen something from him that he couldn't name. At the time, Noah thought he was the center of it all. It took him years to realize he wasn't the prize in that struggle, he was the point of pressure. The thing they were both orbiting differently for reasons Noah didn't yet understand. Noah's heart had wandered. His desire for someone else made Tate feel powerless, abandoned, and heartbroken. How could his little toy fall in love with another? Why couldn't it be happy just here in the sanctuary he had built, surrounded by care and devotion? The realization cut him to the core. His truck no longer wanted to lie in his bed with ease, no longer sought his warmth, his hands, his lips. For 2 weeks Noah had endured him at the quadplex, distant, tense, restless, and Tate knew it. He could feel the subtle resistance, the quiet rebellion, the invisible wall between them growing. The little truck was waiting, wanting perhaps for someone else. Tate's mind raced. He knew if he offered Noah a choice, his little truck would leave. No amount of affection, wealth, privilege, or bribes could anchor him. Noah's integrity was too strong. He would never stay for anything less than what he genuinely wanted. Tate couldn't compete with that. He had tried in every way he knew how, but he understood deep down that nothing could prevent the little truck from leaving once desire shifted elsewhere. Noah misread this. He saw control, he saw force, but Tate only saw love. The need to protect, to preserve, to cling, to ensure that the little truck did not leave, that the years of devotion and shared life would not unravel in an instant. Every act, every embrace, every insistence was a declaration. You are mine, I love you, I cannot bear to let you go, no one will ever take you from me. His little truck would eventually find someone who loved him back. It was only a matter of time, probably in college, when Noah would meet a girl Tate couldn't distract, a girl whose presence Tate couldn't manipulate or overshadow. Tonight Tate had done the one thing he had sworn he would never do. He had never intended to reveal the deepest reason why he loved Noah, the truth behind their closeness, the explanation for why they shared beds and whispered nights, why Tate's care ran so deep. He had told Noah bits and pieces, carefully framed, but Noah hadn't understood. And like everyone else in Lowe's Angels, Noah could not understand. Tate couldn't clarify, couldn't explain further because to lay bare the truth would tear them apart. Noah, generous and forgiving, might forgive everything else, but if he fully understood Tate, understood the raw, obsessive love, the need, the dependency, he would recoil. He would want nothing to do with him. Tate waited, heart hammering, for the shoe to drop, for the moment when Noah would simply say, "Have a good life and leave for good." He knew the truth about wealth, power, influence, and checkbooks. They could buy many things, but not what Noah wanted. Noah wanted happiness, the kind money couldn't buy. He wanted family, love, stability, the nuclear dream that Tate, with all his wealth and privilege, could never offer. Tate wished with every ounce of himself that he could give Noah everything, but he couldn't. So, he climbed on top of his favorite toy, wrapping himself around it, lying stomach to stomach, pressing against every inch of Noah's body. Tonight his little truck would not escape. Tonight it wouldn't run to someone else's arms, someone else's bed. He didn't own Noah because he thought he could command him or because he believed Noah belonged to him in any conventional sense. He owned him because of the years of care, attention, vigilance, and labor he had invested. Noah was his investment, a precious and irreplaceable one, and that investment wasn't leaving tonight. Tate would do anything, everything, except tempt his little toy with bribes, gifts, or indulgences. He would simply hold him, protect him, and wait, because in that embrace, in that closeness, he had the only thing he truly wanted. His little truck right there in his arms, exactly where he had always hoped he would be. If Noah ever tried to leave, Tate would write him a check. He would not allow his little truck to live in lack, discomfort, or quiet punishment, not after everything they had shared. Noah had come into his life with nothing, and Tate could not bear the thought of him returning to that emptiness. Depending on the year, the age, the circumstances of Noah's departure, and Tate's amount of inheritance, Tate would place something tangible in his hands, a guarantee, a promise, a lifeline, so that wherever Noah went he would not suffer. Tate wasn't obsessive in the way people might assume. He wasn't like the boys at school who trapped and controlled their girlfriends, isolating them, shrinking their worlds until they had nowhere else to go. Tate's love did not cage, it provided, it compensated, it endured. If Noah chose to leave, Tate would not die from it. His heart would break, his heart might never heal, but Noah would be happy. It would be the kind of break that remained, something he learned to live around rather than recover from. Life would continue in its ordinary way, unchanged in structure but altered in feeling, as though a single fracture had quietly rewritten the way everything was experienced. If Noah truly didn't want to be near him anymore, if the distance was real and final, Tate would let him go, but he would not let him go empty-handed. He would ensure that Noah could live the life he would have had if he had stayed. That was how much Tate loved him. It wasn't conditional on proximity or affection or even presence. It was constant. Wherever Noah was, he would still receive everything Tate had ever intended to give him: comfort, security, ease, opportunity. Tate would write a check worthy of that life, not something small or symbolic, but something substantial, something that carried weight. It wouldn't be $50,000 tossed aside like an afterthought. It would be half of Tate's inheritance, given freely, immediately, without hesitation. The other half would follow upon Tate's death, written into the future as a final act of devotion. No matter where Noah chose to put his head, whether beside another person in another city in a life completely separate from Tate, he would still be protected. Tate would make sure of it. He would ensure that Noah had access to the same privileges, the same comforts, the same quiet luxuries that had once surrounded him. Because Tate's affection did not end the moment Noah walked away. It did not diminish with distance. It did not fade when the truck chose another road. Noah was still his beneficiary, his responsibility, his quiet promise to the world. Tate would protect him always, regardless of where he went, because that was what love meant to him, not possession, not control, but provision without end. Tate would never allow himself to live like a king, while Noah lived beneath the standard he had grown used to. That imbalance would feel like a betrayal of everything they had shared. Tate had never provided for Noah simply because he was there. He had provided because he cared, because he saw Noah as something worth protecting, something worth elevating, and something worth giving the world to. And that wouldn't change just because Noah chose a different path. Because Noah was a prince, whether he understood it or not. He had been treated like one for so long that it had become invisible to him, woven into the fabric of his everyday life. The warmth, the comfort, the ease, the quiet assurance that things would always be okay, those were not accidents. They had been built carefully and deliberately by Tate's devotion. And even if Noah walked away, even if he chose another life, Tate would not let that disappear. Regardless of distance, regardless of separation, Tate would finance Noah's life quietly, consistently, without expectation. There would be no strings attached, no demands, no conditions waiting to be fulfilled. Noah would wake each day surrounded by comfort, by opportunity, by a life that felt effortless and full, never fully aware of the extent to which it had been safeguarded for him. He would move through the world like royalty without ever needing to claim the title, living in a reality shaped by someone else's unwavering love. And in that way, even apart, Tate would still be there. Not beside him in bed, not wrapped around him in the night, but woven into the structure of his life, invisible but constant. Noah would live like a prince, secure, provided for, untouched by hardship, carrying forward a life shaped by Tate's devotion, even if he never fully understood it. Because for Tate, love did not end with distance. It did not require closeness to exist. It was something quieter, deeper, more enduring, a promise that no matter where the little truck went, it would always be cared for, always be safe, always be loved. His little truck had saved Tate's life in more ways than Tate could ever fully explain, in ways too quiet and too profound to ever put into words. Because of that, there was no world in which Tate wouldn't fight for their relationship now. He clung to hope, fragile, desperate hope, that Noah would stay, that he would choose the warmth of Tate's bed, the familiarity, the safety they had built together over the years. Tate knew, deep down, that Noah didn't care about money or status or the glittering weight of Tate's last name. Those things meant everything to everyone else, but to Noah, they meant nothing. And that terrified Tate because it meant he couldn't rely on these advantages to keep Noah near him. Noah's future felt precarious in a way Tate couldn't ignore. Without a scholarship, without support, Noah would be left to struggle, to scrape by, to face a world that didn't offer him the same safety nets. Tate couldn't let that happen. Quietly, persistently, he went to his father and begged, something he rarely did, for a letter of recommendation. Tate's family name carried weight, generations of legacy tied to places like Yale and Harvard, doors that opened with a signature alone. A letter from his father, a billionaire with influence and reach, could shape Noah's future in ways Noah would never fully understand. But even that wasn't enough for Tate. He worked behind the scenes, unseen, unheard, ensuring every possible advantage fell into Noah's path. He would never tell Noah how hard he fought, how many conversations he had, how many strings he pulled. He would never admit the quiet desperation behind it, the fear that if Noah didn't have a future secured, he would disappear from Tate's life entirely. Tate gave generously, more than generously, donating tens of thousands of dollars, over $50,000, to give Noah a chance, to tilt the odds just enough in his favor. Brown became a possibility not by accident, but because Tate refused to leave anything to chance when it came to Noah's future. And still, he said nothing. Because for Tate, love wasn't something to be announced or tallied. It wasn't something to hold over Noah's head or use as leverage. It was something quieter, something sacrificial. He would build Noah's future in silence, protect it without recognition, and hope more than anything that when the time came, Noah would choose to stay, not because of what had been given to him, but because of what they had always been to each other. I was left fumbling in the dark, thinking I understood the closeness, the intimacy, the purpose of our time together, when in reality I was barely scratching the surface. What he sought, what he truly valued, wasn't friendship, companionship, or even love. It was access, control, the thrill of discovery, and maybe something else entirely, something I wasn't even equipped to see. And that ignorance, that naivety, made me more vulnerable than I had ever been, yet somehow more tethered to him, more fascinated, more incapable of leaving even when every instinct screamed at me to run. Tate couldn't sleep. No one knew this, not his father, not his friends, not even Noah. He needed the soft warmth of someone lying next to him to calm his racing nerves, to quiet his overactive central nervous system, to stop the anxiety from keeping him awake. His insomnia was relentless, and no matter how much he tried, he couldn't just lie alone and let sleep come. When Tate had met Noah, he found someone he could tolerate sleeping next to, someone whose presence actually allowed him to rest. Ironically, it was a young blonde boy with a life that on the surface seemed better than Tate's. Noah's family didn't care too much about him, didn't hover a pry, didn't judge. It didn't matter where Noah slept or what he did or what he said, he was perfectly suited to Tate's need. Noah was, in a way, the perfect candidate to provide the warmth and quiet that Tate craved. And the truth was, Tate liked it far more than he'd expected. The only thing that really mattered to Tate was sleep. 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep, free from anxiety, free from the racing thoughts that could keep him awake until dawn. That was everything. And over the years, Noah had become an integral part of that, so integral that Tate's body had grown used to him, dependent on him. He had tried sleeping next to other people, girls he fancied, friends he liked, but it never worked. Without Noah there, he couldn't sleep. His body rejected it. But Tate would never tell Noah that. That would give Noah more insight than Tate wanted him to have. Instead, he lied or omitted the truth over the years. He left Noah with the belief that he was needed simply as a companion, a buddy, someone to amuse him or be present. The real truth, the terrifying, honest truth, was that Tate needed Noah to sleep. Nothing else mattered. And Tate would give Noah anything, anything at all, if Noah would just lie there and let him have those 8 precious hours of sleep. That was the unspoken contract between them. Noah's presence equaled Tate's sanity, his ability to rest, his reprieve from the storm inside his own mind. The subtle power of that arrangement was Tate's alone, and he guarded it fiercely, just as he guarded the secret of how much he truly depended on him. And that cost wasn't about effort or action or even presence. The cost was mine to feel and mine alone. The gift I gave Tate was unknowable to me at first. It was the gift of myself in a way I hadn't cataloged, hadn't realized was valuable. I didn't give him a friendship he could measure, a loyalty he could quantify, or companionship he could display to the world. I gave him a kind of acceptance that couldn't be replicated, a kind of surrender that couldn't be taught or bought. It was quiet, it was invisible, and it was essential. The irony, the crushing, unavoidable irony, was that what I thought mattered most, my effort, my intention, my desire to please, was meaningless compared to the truth. The thing I believed I was giving freely, consciously, was nothing compared to what I actually offered. It was not something I could point to, not something I could define. It was intangible, unspoken, a presence I didn't even recognize as valuable at the time. And yet somehow, that presence held more weight than anything else in Tate's world. Noah thought to himself the next evening in the spare room. I lay there under him, feeling the press of his body against mine, and slowly the realization settled like ice in my chest. The reason I was here in this room was not what I had ever imagined. I wasn't indispensable because of my actions, my words, or my loyalty. I wasn't irreplaceable because of my attentiveness or my company. I was irreplaceable simply because I existed in this space in a way no one else could. I had unknowingly given Tate something more important than anything I could ever hope to give, something that no one else could offer him, something he could only receive from me. And that realization was almost too much to bear. I had thought I was acting, giving, trying to matter, but in truth, the thing that mattered most had been mine all along, hidden in plain sight, and I hadn't even known it. I stepped back and looked at my work. Even Tate couldn't get through that without waking the entire house. Satisfied, I crawled into bed and turned off the lamp. For the first time in days, I felt a small sense of victory. The room was quiet, the door secure, and Tate was down the hall in his own bedroom. Maybe tonight I'd finally win. I must have fallen asleep quickly. The crash woke me. I sat straight up in bed as the door rattled violently in its frame. The chair scraped loudly across the floor as something heavy slammed into the other side. Tate, I shouted, my heart pounding. Another crash shook the door. The chair held for a second, but then the wood splintered with a loud crack. The door burst inward, the chair skidding across the floor as Tate forced his way into the room. He stood in the doorway breathing hard, his hair disheveled, his eyes blazing with stubborn determination. "You locked me out," he said, like it was a personal betrayal. I stared at the broken door, then back at him in disbelief. "Tate, you just broke the door." Tate stepped inside like that was the least important detail in the world. "You're not sleeping alone," he said firmly. And just like that, my carefully planned victory was over before it had even begun. By Wednesday night, I was getting creative. After dinner, I went through the same routine, said goodnight, headed down the hall and stepped into the spare room. I even made a point of locking the door loudly just in case Tate was listening. But this time I didn't get into bed. Instead, I waited. I sat in the dark for a while, listening to the quiet house, making sure everyone had settled. Then I slipped over to the window and pushed it open slowly. Cool night air drifted inside. The spare room sat over the back side of the house where a narrow ledge ran along the wall. I'd noticed it earlier that week. It wasn't exactly safe, but it was wide enough to step onto if you were careful. I climbed out the window, shut it behind me, and edged along the ledge until I reached the small balcony connected to the fourth-level guest room. It felt ridiculous, but it also felt like the only way I was going to get a full night's sleep without Tate appearing like a heat-seeking missile. Inside the fourth-level room, everything was quiet and empty. I locked that door too, just in case, then collapsed onto the bed. For the first time in days, I slept hard. No interruptions, no footsteps, no door handles rattling, just silence. When I woke up Thursday morning, sunlight was already streaming through the tall windows. For a few seconds, I lay there enjoying the peace, feeling oddly proud of my plan. Then something shifted beside me. Warmth, wait. My eyes snapped open. Tate was lying next to me, sprawled halfway across the bed, sleeping deeply. One arm was draped across my stomach as it belonged there. His breathing was slow and steady, completely peaceful. I stared at him in disbelief. I had locked the other room, climbed out a window, crossed the side of the house, slept on the fourth level, and somehow, Tate had still found me. By Thursday night, I had run out of normal ideas. Every door I locked, Tate broke through. Every room I moved to, he somehow found. It had become less like living in a house and more like playing some absurd, exhausting game of hide-and-seek I was destined to lose. So that night I tried something different. After everyone had gone upstairs and the house went quiet, I grabbed a blanket and slipped down to the garage. The air down there smelled faintly of oil and cold concrete. It was quiet, dim, and far away from the bedrooms. Perfect. I unlocked my car, climbed into the back seat, and wrapped the blanket around myself. It wasn't comfortable, the seats were stiff and the air was cold, but at least it was mine. No doors to break, no spare rooms to invade. For the first time all week I thought I might actually succeed. Sometime in the middle of the night I half woke to the faint sound of a car door opening. My brain registered it distantly through the fog of sleep, but I was too exhausted to fully process it. The door closed softly and the car shifted slightly as weight settled into the passenger seat. I drifted back to sleep. Friday morning, sunlight crept through the garage windows and lit the inside of the car. I blinked awake slowly, then I turned my head. Tate was sitting in the front passenger seat, curled sideways toward me, sleeping deeply. One hand rested lazily on the center console like he'd been reaching toward me even in his sleep. My head fell back against the seat. For a long moment I just stared at the ceiling of the car. I had locked doors, climbed out windows, moved to another floor, and finally slept in my own car. And still, somehow, Tate had found me again. A tired laugh escaped me as the realization finally settled in. My plight was hopeless. I'd known it for years. Tate was terrified of the dark. Even in that enormous room of his with its high ceilings and heavy curtains, shadows seemed to crowd around him like predators when he was alone. It wasn't just fear in the normal sense. I'd seen the stress build up in him, the way his hands would tremble slightly, how his chest would rise and fall unevenly, and the tiny tics in his face whenever he realized I wasn't nearby. The first few times I'd thought he was exaggerating, then I'd witnessed the seizures. Stress seizures, real ones, triggered by anxiety, by isolation, by the absence of something or someone he relied on to stay grounded. And more often than not, that someone was me, my body, my presence. I hated the knowledge, hated the way it bound me to him even when I wanted to run, even when I needed space. I hated how powerless I felt, knowing that if I left him alone in that big room, I might come back to him shaking or worse, sprawled on the floor in a panic I couldn't stop. And yet, I understood why he needed me, why he clung, why he begged, why he wrestled me back to the bed. It wasn't just an obsession, it was survival. And every time I tried to sleep elsewhere, every time I escaped for a few hours, I knew the risk I was taking, knew the invisible strings I was tugging that could snap him into chaos. It made me wary, exhausted, and trapped, but it also made me careful. Because sometimes, even though I hated it, I was the only thing keeping him safe. And that was a responsibility I could never fully escape. On Friday night, I finally mustered the courage to ask Talia if I could sleep on the master bedroom floor. I just needed space away from Tate's constant presence, his obsession, his insistence. My shoulders were tight, my stomach in knots as I spoke. Talia laughed softly, shaking her head. Romeo or Pepe Le Pew, she teased, glancing toward Tate's room down the hall. Her amusement made me flush with embarrassment. But then I glanced at Tate. The look on his face, eyes wide, jaw tight, hands gripping the bedpost, was pure terror. The way he stared at me was enough to freeze me in place. My request, so reasonable to me, had ignited something primal in him. Tate looked over at his father, who was smirking as he ate his breakfast, far too relaxed for what he'd just suggested. That expression, amused, almost testing, made something in Tate snap into sharp focus. The idea of Noah sleeping next to his parents wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unthinkable. A cold wave of protectiveness surged through him, immediate and absolute. Noah didn't belong in that situation, didn't deserve to be put somewhere awkward and exposed, treated like he didn't matter or didn't have a place. The thought of Noah lying there tense, polite, trying to make himself small just to avoid conflict, it made Tate's chest tight. Tate straightened in his seat, his expression hardening. "No," he said more forcefully than before. This time his father did glance up, that smirk still lingering, but Tate didn't waver. "He's not doing that," Tate continued, his voice steady but edged with something unmistakably protective. "If there's a problem, I'll figure it out, but he's not sleeping in your room." There was no hesitation now, no second guessing. This wasn't about rebellion for its own sake, it was about drawing a line. Tate's hand pressed flat against the table, grounding himself as he held his father's gaze. Whatever pushback came, whatever argument followed, it didn't matter. On this he wouldn't budge. I wanted to explain, to justify myself, to tell him I wasn't rejecting him personally. But the terror in his gaze shut me up immediately. It was the same look he got when he thought the world might take me away, when he imagined losing me completely. Talia, ever perceptive, gave me a small, knowing smile. "He's going to be a mess tonight," she said quietly, almost like a warning. I swallowed, cheeks hot with embarrassment, yet strangely relieved. At least I'd tried to set a boundary. At least I'd taken a step to claim a little space. But watching Tate's fear made me realize that even small acts of independence were going to come at a cost. And as he stood there, rigid and panicked, I felt a pang of guilt that maybe, just maybe, even asking to sleep away from him had already been too much. I'd set up a mattress against the wall in the master suite on Friday night, thinking that would finally give me some space from Tate. It was simple enough, just me, a blanket, and the quiet hum of the house. But I could feel Tate's anger that night, a tense, almost electric presence even from down the hall. He wasn't just upset, he was afraid of something, though I didn't know what exactly. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind outside seemed to make him flinch, his anxiety palpable even through the walls. I fell asleep eventually, though uneasily, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd get a few hours alone. Saturday morning came far too soon. I stirred, stretching my arms and rubbing my eyes, and froze. I wasn't on the mattress anymore, I was lying in Tate's bed. The room was dim, early sunlight filtering through the curtains. My heart thumped in confusion and disbelief. How? He must have carried me down the hall during the night. There was no other explanation. I stared at the ceiling for a long moment, trying to process it. My blanket was crumpled beneath me, twisted just enough to suggest I hadn't moved here myself. And yet there was Tate nowhere in sight, probably still asleep next to me, showing who was in charge after whatever effort he'd exerted getting me into his bed. I couldn't tell if I felt relief, frustration, or a mixture of both. Relief that at least he'd been safe, and frustration because no matter how careful I tried to be, Tate always found a way to make me a part of his world, even when I desperately wanted a little space. I sank back into the sheets, exhaling slowly, knowing in the pit of my stomach that this wouldn't be the last time I woke up somewhere I hadn't intended. His obsession had that much power. During breakfast, I cleared my throat and asked Talia quietly, "Do you think I could put a few unpickable locks on the spare room door just to keep out unwanted suitors?" My voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Talia laughed softly, shaking her head with a smile that stretched toward Tate across the table. "Romeo or Pepe Le Pew strikes again," she teased, giving him a playful glance. Terence grimaced. "As long as it keeps my son happy and his performance up at school, I don't care if he sleeps with a gorilla." Tate's jaw tightened, but his eyes were wide, a mixture of indignation and disbelief. "I'll call the locksmith," Talia said, still smiling. "Replace the door and apply the locks. That should keep everyone, well, most people out." I felt a small surge of relief. Finally, a little control, a little space of my own. Tate, meanwhile, scowled silently, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, already plotting how to reclaim his territory. For the first time in days, I felt like I might actually get a few uninterrupted hours of privacy. Tate glared at me across the breakfast table while he nudged my foot with his left toe. I tried to ignore him, and the rest of the day was uneventful. That night I stayed firm, keeping him out of my room. I double-checked every lock and bolt, making sure each one was secure. For a few hours it was quiet, peaceful. I thought maybe, finally, I'd have some space. Then around 10 I heard it, the faintest click of the doorknob. I froze. Click. Then again, louder this time, frantic. The knob rattled and jammed under his weight, Tate's desperation palpable even through the heavy door. "Let me in," he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't answer. "Now Noah, let me in, please." His tone shifted, pleading, almost panicked. Still silence, I held my ground. "Are you alone in there?" Tate asked in a pleading voice. Silence. He started sobbing softly, tears muffled by the door, shaking the frame as he pulled on the knob. "Go to bed," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the hammering of my own heart. "Now." He didn't stop. The rattling, the pulling, the whimpering, all of it filled the room like a storm. "No," he yelled, voice breaking. "No." I stayed put, pressing my back against the far wall, counting to myself, trying to remind myself that this chaos, this desperation, was part of his arrested development, part of his obsession. And no matter how much he cried, no matter how many bolts he jammed, I wasn't letting him in. Not tonight. He kept pulling at the doorknob, frantic, sobbing, but I didn't bend. I wouldn't, I had to hold my ground. He kept at the doorknob for what felt like an eternity, 15 minutes of frantic twisting, pulling, and rattling. He threw all of his weight behind his body, ramming against the door, trying to break the hinges. I pressed myself against the far wall, heart hammering, listening to every scrape and thud. One by one, I heard the locks give way under his force. 3 of them snapped or splintered. Still, he didn't stop. His determination was relentless, raw, and terrifying. Every pull, every shove, every slam against the door screamed that he wouldn't give up. He was going to sleep next to me at any cost, no matter what it took. I gritted my teeth, holding my ground, willing him to exhaust himself. The minutes stretched into an hour, and finally, around 1 in the morning, the noise stopped. The frantic energy faded into silence. He had given up, at least for now. I could hear Tate crying once he gave up on getting through the door that night. I didn't hear him go back to his room, but he must have, because he stopped pulling on the door. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, feeling my pulse slowly return to normal. My eyes closed and I finally fell asleep, relief washing over me like a tide. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window. I blinked awake and froze for a moment, expecting to see him there, lying next to me as usual. But he wasn't. Thank goodness. I rolled over, letting the warmth of quiet and space sink in. For the first time in days, I felt a tiny measure of victory. Small, fleeting, but real. Tate had tried. He had fought. He had raged, but I had survived the night. I heard Talia's footsteps outside my door, light and airy, carrying that familiar giggle of hers. She paused briefly at the top of the stairs, probably shaking her head at whatever spectacle had unfolded in the house overnight, before continuing down to the kitchen. Her laughter floated down the hall, growing fainter as she made her way to the kitchen to start cooking. The sound was oddly comforting, a reminder that life in the house went on, even with Tate's chaos looming somewhere nearby. I lay there for a moment, letting the quiet hum of the morning settle around me, grateful for the small normalcy her presence brought. For once, I could breathe without feeling like I was holding back a storm. I got dressed quickly, trying to get ready to head downstairs and help Talia as she warmed up the catered food for breakfast. Outside my door, I heard something shift, just a small sound but enough to make me pause. For a second, I wondered if Tate was about to try to pull the door off its hinges again. Instead of knocking, though, the footsteps simply turned away. That alone felt stranger than anything else. Tate didn't usually just walk off like that, not when he decided he wanted something. I stood there for a moment, half-dressed and still listening, waiting for the sound of him coming back. It didn't happen. The hallway stayed quiet in a way that didn't feel normal at all, and I couldn't quite shake the feeling that something had changed, even if I couldn't yet name what it was. At breakfast, Tate didn't wait. As I slid into my seat, he yanked me out of my seat and onto his chair, planting me between his legs like I'd been gone for 2 years. His arms wrapped around me in a tight, possessive hug, his head resting against mine, kissing my temple, nuzzling my neck, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of us. He acted like I was his most special person, while my scalp was peppered with his kisses as Tate was sighing happily. Talia laughed, shaking her head at the physical display. "Okay, Pepe Le Pew," she teased, her eyes sparkling. "Let Penelope Pussycat breathe and give Noah space so he can sit in his own chair." Terrence looked up from his newspaper, made a sickened expression on his face, and looked back at his paper. "Son, 1 person per chair, please." Tate barely glanced at him, his grip tightening slightly. "Jesus, you're clingy this morning," she added, smiling, but her tone was gentle, teasing rather than reprimanding. I squirmed slightly, caught between embarrassment and the strange comfort of being held so completely. Tate's intensity was exhausting, but there was no mistaking the relief and joy in his eyes. He'd found me, and for now, that was all that mattered to him. Terrence leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes narrowing at Tate. His voice was low, clipped, but carried across the table with sharp authority. "Tate, you need to learn some boundaries," he said, not taking his eyes off his son. This clinginess, this obsession, it's not healthy. You can't just pull Noah onto your lap and smother him like this every morning." Tate stiffened but didn't respond, his grip on me tightening slightly as if to ward off Terrence's words. "I'm serious," Terrence continued, turning slightly toward me. Noah, you need to make it clear firmly what you will and won't tolerate. I know you care about him, but this isn't normal behavior. He can't control you and you can't enable this. Tate let out a low, almost defensive murmur, tightening his hold on me again. Terrence's gaze softened slightly, though the edge never left his voice. Tate, I know you care, but obsessing over someone like this isn't love. It's possession. You need to grow up, son. This arrested development of yours, it's hurting everyone around you, not just you. I felt the weight of the conversation pressing on both of us. Tate's happy noises quieted, replaced by a tense silence as he absorbed his father's words. And I, nestled in his arms, realized just how impossible it was going to be to navigate between his obsession, his father's warnings, and my own need for space. Uncle Joey and Uncle Tim were sitting a few chairs down from Talia. Both wore expressions that suggested embarrassment at their nephew's inappropriate, immature behavior. Tim exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Something needs to be done about this, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. This can't just keep happening. Uncle Joey gave a small, non-committal nod, leaning back in his chair. You've been saying that for years, he replied lightly, though there was an edge of tired humor in it. Tim shot him a look, and for years nothing changes. Joey didn't answer that. Instead, his gaze drifted across the room and landed on me. A second later, he gave me a quick, almost conspiratorial wink, like he was acknowledging something unspoken between us while refusing to take the situation too seriously. Uncle Joey finally spoke up while he was refilling his orange juice glass. Maybe I could come up with a solution, he said with a small smile, like he was trying to ease the tension rather than escalate it. He leaned over and reached for Noah's glass next, casually starting to pour fresh orange juice. Before he could finish, Tate shifted the glass slightly on purpose, just enough to throw off Joey's aim. The juice spilled onto the tablecloth instead, spreading in a bright, slow stain. Tate's chair scraped back immediately. Noah doesn't need your help, Uncle Joey, he snapped. His voice was sharp, controlled, but barely. You're just a visitor here, why don't you mind your own fucking business? The room went still for a beat. I could feel every set of eyes shift at once, like everyone was waiting to see which way the moment would tip next. Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you? Tate stared at Joey, his voice tightening as the words came faster, sharper. Coming in here like some kind of hero on a white horse, acting as if you can just fix things, fix him. His jaw clenched as he stepped closer, refusing to look away. I know why you show up like this, 3 times a year if we're lucky, and then you disappear again. You go back to your life and act as if none of this exists. His voice cracked slightly at the edge of anger, but he pushed through it anyway. And then you come back, smiling, acting like it doesn't matter, like you don't feel guilty, like you don't care that you barely stay long enough to matter. Tate let out a harsh breath, eyes locked on Joey. Don't stand there and pretend you're doing this for Noah. You show up just enough to feel better about leaving again. Talia placed a hand firmly on Tate's arm. Apologize immediately to your uncle, she said, her tone controlled but unmistakably final. He traveled 7,000 miles to be here today. The least you can do is say thank you for caring. He comes to see you, not the rest of us. Her expression softened slightly, but her point didn't. You've always been his favorite nephew. Tate let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking his head. Of course I'm his favorite nephew, he said. If I were just one of many, he wouldn't give me the time of day. His eyes flicked away for a moment, something tightening in his jaw. Oh, that's right, he does have another nephew, he added, voice sharpening again, and he finds time to write these long, detailed letters to Noah, but I get a postcard once in a while, if that. The words hung in the air after he stopped speaking, more wounded than angry now, though he did nothing to soften them. Joey set his orange juice glass down with a controlled clink. Are you jealous or something? He said, his tone sharpening. Jealous of me spending time with a boy 10 years younger than me? That's pathetic, Tate. Tate's expression tightened immediately. Really? Joey exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. I got to know Noah as a favor to you, he said evenly. You clearly like him. It would have been awkward if I weren't on good terms with him. I was trying to be welcoming, kind, that's all. His gaze held steady across the table. I'm not a thief. I'm not sneaking in and taking things, especially a boy like Noah, from you. I show up, I stay in touch, that's the difference." Tate was seething with jealousy. Joey let out a short laugh and shook his head like he couldn't quite decide whether the situation was serious or just predictable. "At the beginning, that's all it was," Joey said. Then he glanced up, meeting Tate's gaze directly. "I got to know the little blonde boy because he mattered to you." His expression softened slightly, but a few years after he became part of this household, I actually started to love him, in my own way. Talia offered a small, approving smile at that, as if the words confirmed something she already believed. Tate, however, looked increasingly tense, his restraint visibly thinning. "Tate," Joey added more firmly, "you're 18 years old, grow up." He exhaled, steady but unshaken. "I see Noah as a second nephew, I love him like family, and that's something you're going to have to accept. If Noah is comfortable with it and the rest of the family finds it natural, then maybe you should too." His voice stayed calm. "Noah can love many people, including me, that doesn't take anything away from you." For a moment, it seemed like Tate might hold it in, then his control broke. In a sudden, furious motion, he grabbed the edge of the tablecloth and yanked it hard. Plates, glasses, and cutlery crashed to the floor in a loud scatter as everything collapsed into chaos. A few moments earlier, everyone had been sitting around the table eating, watching what had quickly become an uncomfortable display of Tate's possessive jealousy as he confronted his uncle. Joey had been trying to explain, calmly and almost matter-of-factly, that his feelings toward Noah were affectionate in a familial sense, the same way he would speak about a nephew. Then everything unraveled at once. In a sudden burst of anger, Tate yanked the tablecloth and the entire table went with it. Plates, glasses, utensils, everything scattered across the floor in a crashing wave of noise. Even what Noah had been eating only moments before slid off the plate and landed among the wreckage. For a second, the room went completely still, as if no one quite knew how to respond to what had just happened. The silence that followed the crash was heavy, almost physical. Broken glass glinted across the floor, food was scattered in uneven patches, and the smell of spilled juice and ruined breakfast hung in the air. Talia was the first to move. She let out a slow breath, more controlled than angry, as she pushed her chair back. "That's enough," she said sharply, not raising her voice but making sure it carried. Her eyes flicked from the mess to Tate. "Everyone, stay where you are." Joey stood more slowly, looking at the overturned table with a long exhale, as if he was trying to decide whether to be frustrated or simply disappointed. "Well," he said quietly, brushing a bit of food off his sleeve, "that escalated." Talia shot him a look. "Not helpful, Joey." "I'm aware," he replied, though there was no heat in it. She turned her attention back to the room, already shifting into damage control. "No one is to move until I clear the glass. Understand me?" Her tone softened only slightly when it landed on Noah, but her focus remained firm. Joey stepped back from the mess, glancing once toward Tate without pushing further. "We can talk about this when things are not on the floor," he said calmly. Talia bent down carefully, beginning to assess the spill. "And Tate," she added without looking up, "you are going to sit, now." Tate didn't stop, even as Talia bent down to begin cleaning the shattered mess. "Noah isn't your nephew," he said sharply. "He never will be. You don't get to just decide that." His voice rose as the words came faster. "He's not your blood, he's not your family, and he's not yours to define." He looked directly at Joey now, jaw tight. "And he's not yours either." Tate's breathing was uneven, anger still burning through him. "I'm the reason he's in this house," he said. "Not you, not anyone else. Maybe you think you had something to do with it, but you didn't." His hands flexed at his sides. "This isn't supposed to be a competition, but you're all making it one, and I'm stuck in the middle of it." Joey didn't interrupt. He just watched him, arms loosely crossed, expression faintly amused, like he was observing something he'd seen before and didn't take as seriously as Tate did. Joey finally spoke, his tone no longer casual or amused. "How I feel about Noah and my relationship with him is none of your business, Tate," he said firmly. "He is my nephew, maybe not by blood, but that doesn't matter. I look out for him, I take an interest in him. I make sure he's included in this family, especially when you're acting like this." His eyes flicked briefly to the ruined table before returning to Tate. You should apologize to everyone here. That wasn't just an argument, that was a childish outburst and it crossed a line. Joey pulled his chair back in and sat down again, deliberately steady as if refusing to be pulled further into the chaos. I care about him, he added more quietly but no less firmly, and you're going to have to accept that. The room felt even heavier after that. Tate stood there, rigid, breathing hard, staring at Joey like he was trying to hold himself together through sheer force of will. The silence that followed wasn't calm, it was strained, like something in him was right on the edge of breaking again. Tate took a deep breath, his voice softening slightly. So let's get one thing straight, Joey. You do not take Noah on long car rides without me. You do not replace me in that role. You ask me, because I am your nephew and I am not going anywhere. Tate's voice was cold, his words sharp as ice. Let me make something very clear, Joey. If you choose to bond with Noah instead of me, if you take him on car rides instead of spending time with me, if you direct your paternal attention towards him instead of me, then you will have made your choice, and I will not be a part of your life anymore. Tate's eyes flashed with anger, his voice steady and sure. I will stop seeing you as my uncle. You will be dead to me. I will not have you giving your attention to someone who is not your nephew, who is not your family. He does not get your attention. You are my uncle and you should be acting like it. Tate's voice was laced with hurt, his words heavy with emotion. You should be bonding with me, spending time with me, writing to me, not him. I am your nephew and I deserve your attention, your love, your affection, not him. Tate's voice was firm, his stance unyielding. So let's get one thing straight, Joey. You do not bond with Noah instead of me. You do not take him on car rides instead of spending time with me. You do not direct your paternal attention towards him. You are my uncle and you should be acting like it, or else you will lose me forever. Promise me, Tate said, his voice quieter now but still tight with lingering intensity. The room seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Joey looked at him for a long second, no sarcasm now, no humor, just a steady, tired kind of clarity. Then he nodded once. I promise, he said simply. The words didn't fix anything, not really. The tension didn't vanish, and the aftermath of what had just happened still lingered in the air like dust that hadn't settled yet. But for the first time in several minutes, Tate's breathing slowed just slightly, as if something in him had latched onto that single word and refused to let go of it. Joey smiled. Good, now let's get back to dinner, and Tate, no more lunging at me, okay? Tate flipped Joey off. No promises. As they turned to the kitchen, Tate watched Noah, his heart still pounding in his chest. He knew he had to control his jealousy for Noah's sake, but seeing Joey's hands on Noah had sent him into a spiral he couldn't control. He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Noah. He would try for Noah, but Joey had better stay away or Tate wouldn't be responsible for his actions. Once all the dishes had been returned to the table and everything was back in its usual place, everyone quietly resumed eating. Joey had already left the table, deciding it was best to remove himself from the situation. Besides, he had nearly finished his breakfast anyway. An uneasy silence settled over the dining room. No one spoke, but every member of the Blue family was still thinking about Tate's explosive outburst. They exchanged occasional glances but kept their thoughts to themselves, unwilling to stir up another confrontation. The silence lasted until Tate finally excused himself and headed upstairs to speak with his father. A week later at breakfast, Tate stood behind Noah and wrapped both arms completely around him, holding him close while everyone gathered in the kitchen. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual despite the tension twisting in my chest. Can Maya come over for a few hours today? I asked Talia. Sure, she said, smiling, glancing toward the fridge. I've got a few sandwiches and some lemonade, help yourself. I felt Tate shift behind me. His arm, already resting near my shoulder, tightened around my neck as if my words had triggered something inside him. My pulse spiked. Tate, you're suffocating me, I gasped, pressing my hands against his grip.